time again. And so they're highly unreliable is the point with respect to these things. Your question is a thought-provoking one, and I believe that for companies to think about whether the world that they exist in with the lawful hacking that goes on or the unlawful hacking that goes on is better than trying to figure out some way forward that raises the security level in a good way of all these devices. Look, I mean, these are challenging dilemmas also, because if we do find a vulnerability, we're in a bit of a pickle there too, because we want to protect these devices, right? Because the FBI in particular is in the business of investigating cyber hacking by bad people and trying to prevent it and working with victims. We do this every day across the country. And so if we find vulnerabilities, it's a difficult choice to decide whether to exploit that, because we can use it in certain circumstances to find information about what terrorists are doing or something. Or does this pose a threat to the ecosystem itself that's so great that we need to be public about it and tell the companies that this vulnerability exists and to fix it? And so it's a very uncomfortable and challenging dilemma. And so we engage in lawful hacking, but I would say we don't relish it, we don't like it, right, because it's not as useful as you would think, and it poses these other dilemmas.
I don't know the extent the Bureau is involved in this, but there is a process, the vulnerabilities equities process, that is designed to essentially review what these vulnerabilities in technology are that the government is aware of and make a decision on when to disclose and notify the manufacturers and the users ultimately of those products versus to keep that. Can you talk about whether that process is working in a satisfactory way?
Well, it works. I mean, we do it, but is it satisfactory? I don't know. I mean, I think these are challenging decisions that reasonable people could disagree about, and that people inside the government are doing their level best to try to get it right. But you can have a debate about that.
Yeah. Do you all have any thoughts on how you see that playing out? I mean, whether it be in the U.S. or maybe the European context too, about. I mean, are we getting that balance right, or is it just are we too early in trying to make those calculations to know if that's working?
So industry has sort of limited insight into how the equities process works, which in some ways is right, because it is one that's associated with national security. But I think there is something to be said for, because it is sort of an informal process within the executive branch, having that codified in some way might be good. We have no position on this legislation, but we saw a bill came out last week from, I believe, Senator Schatz's office that looks at sort of taking the existing vulnerabilities equities process, ensuring that all the appropriate stakeholders, the representatives from Department of Commerce and state, but also equally balanced on the law enforcement side, ODNI, NSC representatives, and ensuring that conversation, when it does happen, there may be a presumption towards disclosure, but ensuring that the law enforcement equities and national security equities are appropriately voiced. And the soft foreign power equities are appropriately voiced, which we also have, concerns about. The State Department has long advocated for sort of secure communications technologies, and ensuring that their voices being heard as part of the process is very important to us too.
Do you want to make any comments on that?
Shane, very simply, how long we are going to wait? I think we need time to find one solution or different solution. We are giving ourselves the time through this inclusive process. We hopefully, and we want to share this with our partners, because we have to be clear about it. We cannot solve the problem in our own jurisdiction. We have to find a way to work together with our partners, and the first one are, of course, the US colleagues. But at the same time, law enforcement and intelligence services locally, they face an issue, and they will continue to do what they can in order to get the information. At the moment, the only possibility is another San Bernardino-like system where you enhance your ability to lawful hacking and you try to overcome the problem. But we need to find a spectrum of solution that allow us in a medium term to identify the best way forward.
Hey, James alluded to this, and I'd like to ask you, and maybe ask Luigi too. I mean, in the case of the San Bernardino case and the investigation, ultimately an entity, as you said, that came forward to the FBI with a solution. Are you finding more entities coming forward with more solutions to problems that they think you might have?
A lot of people want to sell us stuff. Yeah, that's for sure. I mean, I don't want to say too much about this, but we have technologists that we have inside the government that are focused on this kind of issue, and there are groups of people and corporations on the outside that are invested in this too. Corporations themselves are trying to figure out what the vulnerabilities are in their own systems, and so they have a range of people that are out there looking for all this. So it's a very active environment. I mean, I guess the thing I worry about a bit in terms of thinking about this process and how we're going to handle it in terms of evaluating the vulnerabilities is this stuff is moving very quickly, right? Technology is changing constantly, so things are being updated. The updated things have vulnerabilities in them. Those are detected by, governments, and they're also detected by malicious actors. And exploits are developed, and there's a lot of them. And so, anytime you have a process that gets, I'm worried about any process that's too bureaucratic in terms of trying to make these assessments. You're just going to have the American people are going to have to think about that because this stuff is moving at a very, very rapid pace.
Well, and to that point, I mean, as we're sitting here, we're talking about this environment in which we find ourselves, and it's easy to forget that this is a relatively new environment. I don't think that 2 or 3 years ago I had many, if any, encrypted apps on my smartphone. Today I have 9 for various purposes and various forms of communication. And this is a foundational question that we might have even started with, but why did this happen? I mean, why did we suddenly go from an environment in which I think most people were probably not familiar at all with these kinds of technologies to being able to download them from the App Store and use them in any way that you want? I mean, is it the Snowden revelations? Is it a fundamental breakdown in trust? I mean, why are so many people putting Signal on their phone? I mean, I know how many people I talk to are putting it on their phone, but presumably a lot more people than just those who are engaged in the kind of profession I am are doing this. I mean, why is this happening now? What unleashed this, do you all think? John, you want to start?
I don't want to say that the Snowden revelations were the sole cause of it. I think that might have precipitated a larger conversation that folks are more aware of government access and not just government access, but whoever might be interested in reading what you're writing or looking at what you're purchasing or whatever. But I don't think that's whatever I don't think that's the precipitating event. I think sort of just a larger recognition of sort of the regularity of breaches going on. They happened before Snowden. They have happened since. I think the recognition on a sort of individual basis that you're not as secure on the internet as you thought you were. It has nothing to do with Snowden's revelations about government access and just a wider understanding by the population that the internet wasn't designed to be secure. It was designed to connect folks, and so protecting yourself in that environment is sort of incumbent upon yourself, and that's why you're seeing it, I think.
What do you all think? Explain the zeitgeist.
Only one comment. I mean, as all of us have discovered the internet and the beauty of internet, also what you call here the bad guys have discovered internet and the ability to connect. In Europe, we have clearly this problem where the social media are being exploited quite exponentially more and more, and therefore the need for the corporation and for the users to protect themselves also from this. So there are a series of issues that bring us to this.
I think it was happening anyway, and the Stone revelations accelerated it. I think that's the basic answer. And then layer on top of that, I think concerns that people have about their government. We've said before, you shouldn't trust the FBI. You should hold us accountable. Yeah. That makes sense. So anyway, I think that's the basic explanation.
Bijan, do you think we've reached a point where, if companies aren't offering encryption, that their customers are somehow going to think that they're irresponsible if they're not leading? Do companies find themselves having to sort of put that out there like a good housekeeping seal of approval now?
I don't know that necessarily it's their customers, but it is a reasonable best practice under Section 5 of the FTC Act, and so companies are always looking to be as compliant as they can be with regulatory authorities that are interested in data security, and they're also interested in. I don't think it's sort of an advertising tool. I think it's something that users have come to expect on the part of the companies, and so not having it makes you circumspect.
Does not having it also though make you seem like you're, I'm going to make an exaggerated statement here, but for the purposes of fact that you're somehow a stooge of the government? Because I think back to when Apple and the FBI were trading their various briefs in that case. In the first one that was written, there was an acknowledgement by Apple's lawyers that if we give in to the FBI on this, it's going to hurt our marketing. We can't be seen as giving an inch on this.
I don't know. I think they were making a First Amendment argument rather than one directly about marketing. But
they did say marketing. That was left out of subsequent briefs, but it was in the first one.
I mean, certain companies might treat it as a marketing ploy. Apple is not a CCI member, so I can't speak on their behalf. But my interactions with my member companies suggest to me that it's either an issue of users wanting to trust the companies that they're choosing to provide them with services, or it's an issue of basic optimized security hygiene. Like you don't want to be offering products to customers that are eventually going to break, or eventually going to leave them vulnerable. That's not a good way of doing business. Here or anywhere else in the world.
So just being seen is a responsibility to make safe products more at this point too. All right, why don't we turn to questions from the audience right now? So please put up your hand if you have a question. All right, we'll come down here in the first row to two people here in the first couple of rows. So wait for the microphone to come down to you. There you go. All right. Okay, let's go here. Yes, thanks.
I'm Mike Nelson, and I've been working on encryption policy for about 25 years, since I was at the White House co-chairing the interagency group trying to figure out how Clipper chip could work. It didn't, because people didn't adopt it. I think we all agree that the technology has to be something that both industry and customers want. And I represent now a West Coast-based web security firm. So let me share our thoughts from the West Coast. Our first thought is that if there is this magic technology, it would have been invented 5 or 10 years ago, and somebody would have made billions of dollars off of it. All the technologists say there is no way to build a back door or a front door that people are going to trust and that aren't going to introduce new problems. So we have to look at what really will work. And it seems to me that the scenario that none of you have mentioned is the scenario where we have the government doing things to make sure we have strong encryption rather than undermining it. And you've already mentioned the cases where various leaks exposed efforts by the government to promulgate ineffective encryption. If instead we had strong encryption, you would have 1,000 times more data to use to go after the bad guys. Today we have the technology where everybody could practice self-surveillance. I could have a device in my home that recorded everything that happened there, and I would do that if I knew that data stayed under my control. 100 million homes could have that. Crime would be a lot more difficult. There's all these ways in which we could be deploying stronger technology if individuals had control over the data, and that data could then be used to fight crime. And it could be used on streets, it could be used in banks, there's all these places it could be used, but it will only be used if we trust it. And right now, we have no reason to trust it. So my question really is, how can we have a higher level of transparency and trust? How can governments actually reveal the vulnerabilities so that the industry can deploy the Internet of Things, the cloud of things, self-surveillance, all these ways in which we could give you data to prevent crime rather than, and prevent millions of crimes, rather than giving you the data you need to investigate a few hundred crimes.
Isn't that the billion-dollar idea, though?
Well, it is.
Yeah.
Strong encryption everywhere is
Yeah.
100 billion.
Right. Well, who would like to tackle some of that what Mike is putting on the table?
I guess I don't understand it because I'm not sure what type of data you're talking about. It sounds like you're talking about metadata.
No, I'm talking about setting up a system in my own home where I record everything that happens. I have my own self-surveillance system, closed-circuit TV. Anything that happens in my home, I'm going to know what happens.
And so with a warrant, that we could come and have access to that data, is what you're saying. So it would not be actually encrypted then, or it would be encrypted with a key that you maintained, I guess, right?
You'd have to go through me to get that data.
And how do I deal with a operative of ISIS, let's say, who's communicating using end-to-end encryption overseas?
You're going to have a lot more data about what that person is doing in the real world rather than what they're doing in cyberspace.
I don't know where that data comes. I don't know.
Today they have to get a truck. They have to do things. And with this Internet of Things, we're going to have literally 1,000 times more data than we have today. And you're going to be able to get that data from law-abiding citizens and from governments.
If I have two, I disagree with you. If you have two ISIL operatives in Syria talking to each other using an American system, American messaging app that's end-to-end encrypted, they are going to be able to to carry on those communications and plot whatever they're plotting, and we will not be able to see that. That data will not exist in, I think, if the company doesn't have the key, the two communicants have the key, they're not about to give it to us, and we're not about to go tell them that we're looking at them.
But you're focusing on 1% of the problem. There's this huge amount of new data that you're going to have, which will let you determine what they're doing once they...
Look, the American people have to make the choice about how much data they want generated about themselves and how that will be accessible to law enforcement. And I'm not going to try to preach about that across the entire country at this particular moment with respect to it. What we're trying to say is that there is data that will be available. Your kind of system will have costs as well, right? If every single utterance, every single activity within our homes is recorded and is available to law enforcement, the American people have to think about whether they want to live in that kind of world. That's not for me to decide.
It's only available if the individual who owns the house makes it available.
Maybe,
and
unless somebody breaks in and steals the key because grandma wrote it on a sticky next to the phone or something. I mean, because you can't remember the 50,000 passwords that you have to remember. I don't know. It's just, I take your point. There's a lot of data available. We try to make the use of it in accordance with lawful means. But I disagree. I don't think what you're talking about is the solution to this problem, because we have to deal with global threats.
Well, that's the point, is that we're not going to find a way in which we have global government. David Brin has written a marvelous book called The Transparent Society that describes this world where everybody can watch everybody, but at the end of the day, you have control over your own data. And it's the scenario no one talks about. We all focus on this one use case of the ISIS person talking to another ISIS person.
Because I, at the FBI, have to deal with that. I've got to deal with those people that are trying to kill people in the United States. So I can't ignore that problem, right? I take your larger point. We want to have access to data when it's appropriate and so on. But we have to deal with that other scenario, and that other scenario is a dangerous scenario.
But if you build the whole infrastructure to deal with that scenario, you miss the 99% that you could have if we could trust the ecosystem.
Again, that's why I'm not trying to propose something that we're not sitting here with a technical solution that we're trying to impose on anybody.
Okay, there's a question right behind you, actually, and then we're going to come over to this side.
Thanks. David Sturman from New America. My question regards the particular threat you're talking about, and what unique material difference in how deadly or how organized attacks or attack plots inside the U.S. Have you seen because of communications back to Syria? Is that actually increasing death toll? Is it in Europe and elsewhere? We've seen cases where it mobilizes existing networks that do seem to provide arms, etc. In the U.S., do we really have that problem now? Are you looking forward? Is it already here? Thanks.
The problem has been here for some time in terms of, again, it's operatives outside the United States directing people inside the United States to move to an encrypted messaging platform and then having communications about that. Having communications about whatever there is they're talking about, and we can't see it. So that has been an increasing problem over time. Look, there are examples that we are able to talk about. The Garland, Texas one is one that we figured out that we can talk about. There are other examples that happen on a regular basis that we don't talk about because those matters might be still under investigation. We don't want to talk about it too much, which is a dilemma. And I take the point about transparency. The government needs to be transparent so the American people can understand what's going on. I agree with that. But we're trying to figure out the balance so that we don't tell the bad guys what it is that we're capable of and what we're not capable of so that they can use that to their advantage. But it is a real problem today. It is going to increase, we expect, over time, but it's a real problem today and has been for several years.
Okay. I saw a hand up over here. Yes, sir, right here in the blue shirt. Sorry, sir, right in front of you. Then I'll come to you next, sir. The gentleman here in the beard first. Yes, thanks.
Yes, my name is John Meredith. I was surprised you mentioned you have no proposals from the FBI as far as legislation. How are we going to go forward if you don't make a formal request, expressing what your requirements are to the appropriate committees in Congress?
So there are a lot of legislative proposals that I could give you, but the way it works is that the FBI is part of the executive branch, and there's a process for determining whether or not the executive branch is going to put forward a legislative proposal. And so there are a variety of different ways you could go about dealing with this problem. This is not so hard that you can't write in a concise way a legislative proposal. The difficulty is, the challenge is getting a legislative proposal, writing a law that achieves what you want to achieve. That's the hard thing. So we as a society, I think, have not figured out what we want to achieve. Once we figure that out, balancing all these different equities that we've all been talking about, then writing the words on the page is not that hard, quite honestly. But we don't agree on how to balance all these different equities. You can see reasonable people are up here discussing it and don't have the same view, and reasonable people out in society and corporations and elsewhere don't agree on this, and we're trying to figure it out. But once we come to some consensus, the writing of the words on the page is, quite frankly, not that hard.
Bijan, can I just, to follow up real quick, just ask you just quickly on this, can you imagine a world in which we don't even bother with a law, but simply the industry just develops certain standards and codes of conduct that say, under certain circumstances, we will cooperate with law enforcement if the following criteria are met, right? Major terrorist attack, prevent loss of life, something like that. I mean, because it seems like the theme of this is like we're not getting a law anytime soon. I mean, and if you look at Congress right now, where they can't even get a Republican Congress to a caucus to agree on health care, we're not going to move on to encryption anytime soon. So, could you imagine a situation where we just bypass the law and come to some sort of ethical code of conduct or something like that?
I mean, so industry already cooperates to the extent it can, especially with national security investigations. But you've seen it through industry transparency reporting. There's a predisposition, I think, in the part of industry to cooperate, sometimes to users' chagrin, I think, with law enforcement investigations. Whether a consortium of companies would get together and develop an ethical code of conduct to decide when to provide lawful access to encrypted systems, I can't imagine that being, just because we still run into the same problems that, okay, now we have this consortium of companies that are selling products that are less good than the other products of the companies that are not in this consortium. There are sort of market pressures that would prevent that from happening, I think.
Okay. Yeah.
I think your question, Shane, is very interesting, because we are experiencing within European Union, in our relation to the social media company, exactly this kind of framework. So we have engaged, as I said, at the EU Internet Forum, when it comes to removal of terrorist content on their platform, exactly on inviting them to consort together and create a consortium so as to remove the terrorist content according to the terms of condition. And some of the companies, I will not name which one, have even changed the terms of condition in order to make sure that the referral process coming from the Internet referral units all over the world, but in particular from Europe, is immediately taken down. So the concept is the same. The public authorities discussing with the companies, inviting them to take up their own social responsibility and changing the framework or adapting the framework in which they work. So as under their voluntary initiative, they will make sure to intervene when is necessary, assessing themselves under their own terms and conditions when to do it. It's something that we are exploring as well in Europe.
Okay. All right, sir, now to you.
Yes, sir, thank you. My name is...
I think your mic's off, maybe. Get you a new one.
Thank you.
There you go.
My name is Ali Siraj. I'm the president of the National Coalition for Dialogue with the Tribes of Afghanistan. I come from a nation where tens of thousands of our people have been massacred initially by the Al-Qaeda, then by the Taliban, now by the Daesh. We Afghans consider the Daesh as African beasts, with the honeycomb being inside the Middle East. I can appreciate the fact that you are all going through the technical thing about finding a solution for encryption. Even if you're to resolve the encryption problem, you're not going to stop these people from killing and doing what they have intended, what they are intending on doing. Why doesn't the world concentrate on who the queen bee is? Who is the queen bee that is funding the operation? The person who comes and does the killing in the United States or inside Afghanistan, he's being supported by somebody above him, who in turn is being supported by somebody above him. Al-Baghdadi is just one of the many steps that is being taken. Above al-Baghdadi, there is somebody else or somebody else that are funding this. Why don't we go after those people who are funding the operation and cut off their funding? And if you cut off their funding, they will not be able to have the opportunity to create the suicide. They have to pay every suicide bomber that comes to Afghanistan. They pay anywhere from $5,000 to $20,000 to their families so they can go.
Let's give these people a chance to respond to your question, which is a bit outside the scope of this
I understand.
But if anybody wants to tackle that very large question, I think there's a pretty concerted effort to take out the people who are funding these groups. But
yeah, I mean, I guess I would just say the United States government is using all implements of national power to try to deal with the threat posed by ISIS. There's no doubt. I mean, including trying to deal with their finances. But they're very aggressive. They're very creative. They have lots of funding sources, and so it's a challenging problem. But I agree that cutting off the funding is a significant way that we could damage the organization, and we aggressively do that. It's just hard.
I want to make sure I'm not missing anyone on this side. Were there people on this side? I saw we have a question over here from you, ma'am, right? You wanted to ask your question? But I want to make sure people on this side are taken into account, too. So raise your hand over here if you have one. No? All right, well, we'll go to you next. Okay.
My name is Dee Dee Cutler, and I have a very simple question. Do you have any estimated time of arrival when you might solve this encryption problem?
That is the big question, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, you're the experts.
We'll figure it out in 5 minutes over coffee.
Well, I mean, I think that's a very reasonable question, and I mean, there's a lot of assumptions embedded in this discussion that this is somehow intractable, right? But I mean, is there a time horizon on something like this? Are we near it, or is it going to take a catastrophe that focuses the mind? And to James's earlier point, that's not a great time to be coming up with policy solutions.
Well, let's hope that's not the case, obviously. But,
sure.
No is the direct answer to your question. I think that, in other words, I don't know when this will be resolved. As I suggested earlier, I think a way to proceed might be to focus on a part of the problem, such as the data at rest on devices, for example, or you could pick another part of the problem, and then try to focus our efforts on that and have a robust technical discussion, trying to, as the gentleman was saying earlier, trying to actually sit down with technology experts and say, okay, if we did this, what are the costs? If we did that, what are the costs? What are the trade-offs? How do we think about that? I guess I would say I don't agree that all technologists think that this can't be done. I've talked to plenty of technologists who think it can be done. But There are risks in everything that you do. There are risks in the systems that we have today. Let's be frank, the systems that we have today are not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. They're filled with vulnerabilities. You have data that is acquired about us by lots of different companies, and we have no clue where it is, what's happening to it. It's opaque, it's unaccountable, and it is at risk as well. So there's risks abound in this area, and I think focusing our efforts on perhaps one part of the problem may be a way forward to try to see if we can build consensus. That does require folks to acknowledge that law enforcement does face a problem, that the other alternatives that are available to us are insufficient, such as metadata, lawful hacking. They are insufficient. I'm saying they're insufficient, and then to move forward with a dialogue to see if something can be done technically.
Luigi or Bijan, you want to lay odds on ETAs for solving the problem?
Well, we have launched this kind of debate, as I told you last year, and we are putting together the technical people, the lawyers, the civil society, the politicians to have this discussion. We are planning to exhaust our preparation until the end of this year. But then we will put up option for a political debate. As James said already before, society needs to decide where is the balance. And through the political representative, democratically elected in our country, with the civil society, with the company, there must be a discussion and then a collective decision where to put exactly the demarcation line, how far we want to go between the discussion on security and privacy or security versus security.
I don't even bet on a March Madness pool, so no odds for me. But as far as sort of coming to a solution, I think it's not going to happen in the near term. It'll probably be a medium, longer term conversation that has to happen. God forbid there isn't an attack in the sort of interim there. But if I were to, put money down on something, I think the solution in the end would be sort of a recognition by after the course of a public conversation that looks at sort of these technical problems and balances all these equities, that it may be that the insufficiency of metadata and other surveillance mechanisms is sufficient for the American public or the public worldwide.
Okay. Ma'am, you have a question right here. Would you put your hand up so they can see you with the mic? There we go.
Thank you. My name is Elizabeth McWhorter. I'm with the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee. My question's for Mr. Baker. I get that you don't want to advertise capability gaps to the bad guys. But the challenge for policymakers is that transparency helps provide legitimacy to provide political will towards action. And I think we're lacking that transparency. And I know the FBI used to produce publicly available reports on the domestic terrorism situation annually until I think they ended in 2005 was the last report. And that data is really hard to come by these days. I know GW University and Seamus have been great as far as providing a lot of publicly available analysis on this issue. And I'm glad to see the 60 Minutes report and hear that the FBI is more willing to talk about Garland and investigations like that and your limitations. But moving forward, it would be nice to, from a policymaker's perspective, to have a bit more transparency or coordination, and I'd like to know how the FBI plans to do that.
So we, with respect to trying to collect data, and that's how I'm taking your question, data about this to really explain what the problem is so that people can have a sense of what it is. It's a totally legitimate point. We're trying to collect data that we think is meaningful and reflects the problem. And as I said earlier, when we've looked at different time periods, but the one that I have it clear in my head is from the last 3 months of last year, where we had, let's say, roughly it was around 2,500, I think, devices that were brought to the FBI from around the country. for analysis, and we could not open about 40% of those. We'd had no technical means to deal with those. What kinds of cases those were, I think we have the data on that to a sort of a degree. One of the challenges that we face is that law enforcement officers and intelligence officials who are busy and doing investigations quickly figure out what types of platforms they can get access to and which ones they can't. And they are not going to waste their time seeking a Title III order on the criminal side or a FISA, let's say, on the intelligence side. Those are labor-intensive processes to get authorizations to do those kinds of surveillances. And they just won't waste their time if they know the thing is encrypted anyway, so I'm not going to get anything. So why do I bother? So that is one of the most significant dilemmas we've had in terms of trying to count that, where people are just saying, I'm not going to waste my time with that. And it's a data point that's missing that therefore does not, any data that we're going to come forward doesn't really reflect the true nature of the problem, because people are self-censoring out in the field. They're just not bothering with it. Those cases never make it to headquarters. They never make it to the Justice Department across the street from the FBI or U.S. Attorney's offices. So it's an incomplete picture. We're struggling with that, and that's why we sort of, not sort of, we have focused on this one collection point in terms of data that we know is available to us, and we're going to try to collect more data. We have people actively thinking about how to do that, because you're right, we need to back this up with data. I agree.
I think a flip side that, maybe not from industry's perspective, but as a curious person's perspective, would be, what sorts of cases are out there that, the intrepid FBI agent still manages to sort of crack the case absent the encryption being addressed at headquarters. The ones where, there are these 40% or 43% of devices that we can't access. But what percentage of those cases were they able to move forward to a prosecution or a closed investigation of some sort?
Well, we keep moving on all cases because we're not going to be stopped by any of these impediments, right? So we're not going to give up. But the issue is, at what cost, right? The investigation may take longer, as I said earlier. It may be riskier. You might have to put a human source or an FBI agent in harm's way in order to get the data. So that's, and it's more expensive, and the risk to the integrity of the investigations, integrity of the investigation. So all of those costs go along with it, even at the end of the day, if we're able to solve it, notwithstanding encryption.
Okay,
that's a hard one to count, quite honestly.
Sure. Sorry, James. The gentleman right here in the third row, and this will be the last question.
Thank you. My name is Brian. I'm a student here at GW Law. I just wanted to reflect on the views of two groups which I believe have been underrepresented in this conversation so far, but it's been a great conversation nevertheless. And the first group, I think, is really consumers who might need encryption or might need other privacy tools to prevent their data from being hacked by malicious actors, and whether it's criminals or terrorists or other cyber actors, they really have not been and are usually not adequately represented at conferences like this. And the other set of views is really that of the human rights and civil society activists overseas, many of whom face autocratic governments. And it's all very well and good to have discussions about democratic deliberations and passing the right legislative and policy solutions within the UK, within the US and the EU. But the main issue, or the issue which always happens, is that these tools then get demanded by the governments overseas. And if US companies especially have cooperated with local government agencies here in the US and the EU, then the issue becomes, should they also cooperate to provide such tools to foreign governments as well, which may be of a more autocratic slant. So I wanted to ask, therefore, what measures are you taking in each of your legislative and policy conversations to ensure that the views of consumers, as well as human rights activists and civil society activists, are adequately represented?
Okay, great.
I can jump in. Well, one, on the representation issue, it turns out that there's a conference in Brussels called RightsCon happening this week. You should. There may be some live streams. Most of the human rights and privacy advocates in DC and in Brussels are there. So they were invited, from what I understand, and they just couldn't make it because they're on planes right now. But when it comes to sort of the collaboration with those organizations, I know industry, me in particular, I have robust relationships with folks in the human rights community, the privacy community, representing consumers' rights, and I'm sure the FBI and EU have similar interactions, I think, in your stakeholder conversations, but I'll let you guys speak to that.
Definitely, to reassure you, the consumers and what we call in Europe the civil society, including the NGOs, are part of our forum where they sit and they present the views and they are followed and their position are taken up. There was also another point on your question, how you deal with the possibility that other foreign countries would use, let's say, the abilities. That's something that we discuss and we are potentially concerned about, and that's why the point on jurisdiction is so relevant in my view. We have to be very careful to talk about legislative proposal that then would push the companies to make available not only to ourselves but to other foreign countries the ability to decrypt their own system. So that's something that we really take care of, and it's part of the discussion that we have.
James, the last word.
Sure. So we're hopeful for a solution to this problem, but a solution that results in more people's data being vulnerable and more cybersecurity threats and more consumers being exploited is not a solution. If it does that, then it's not a solution. If it does not protect innocent people from abuse by repressive governments overseas, then it's not a solution. We agree with that, we know that, and what we hope for is some type of solution that appropriately balances all these things in the right way, that protects innocent people, that enables law enforcement to do what it needs to do, that allows companies to be innovative and competitive in a global marketplace, right? And we have to try to get all of those together, or it's not a solution. It's not. And it won't be acceptable to society, and there will never be a piece of legislation that moves forward if you can't get enough people behind it, and you're not going to unless it deals with all these things simultaneously.
Okay. I think our host is going to have some last words, but before he does that, I want to thank the panel very much for being here, for a great discussion, and thank you all, and for your questions.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much to the panelists, and as absolutely great conversation. I cannot think of a better way to kick off this two-day event. If I quantitatively were to think of the three words that I've heard consistently from all the speakers and from the Baroness before that, the words are dilemma, balance, and discussion. And I think those are going to be the three themes that we're going to be exploring tomorrow. So I'll be very brief. Just a note. We're going to be starting again tomorrow morning. At 9 o'clock, we have coffee outside. And then at 9:35, we're going to have a keynote by Dr. Anwar Gargash from the UAE. So I very much look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Today was a fantastic appetizer, and I cannot think of a better one more of substance, to the larger conversation which we're going to have tomorrow. We're going to be speaking again about encryption, about privacy. We're going to be talking a lot about counter messaging. So I very much look forward to seeing you tomorrow, and I want to thank you again for coming tonight. Thank you. Bye.
A Senate panel will look into how sexual assaults against young athletes are investigated. Witnesses include several former gymnasts and a representative from the U.S. Olympic Committee. That's live from the Judiciary Committee at 10 a.m. Eastern on C-SPAN 3. You can also watch online at cspan.org or listen on the free C-SPAN radio app. Later, a House committee considers legislation that would require the Treasury Secretary to provide President Trump's tax returns and other financial information from 2006 to 2015. That's live from the House Ways and Means Committee at 4 p.m. Eastern, also on C-SPAN 3.
C-SPAN's Voices from the Road, We recently visited 17 historically black colleges and universities, asking students, what issue would you like Congress or the administration to address in the first 100 days?
Hello, my name is Maya Reeves, and I am a student here at North Carolina Central University. And in Trump's first 100 days in office, I would love for him to grasp understanding and that although we didn't all vote for him, we all are represented under him. And I would also like him to work on building and maintaining those relationships with other countries that we've developed over the years as our commander-in-chief. Thank you.
My name is Darrell Rise II. I am a senior here at Grambling State University. What I'd like to see for the first 100 days of the Trump administration is just taking care of our schools, better their education, of anything, free education, public schools, and anything else. I also like to see in the first 100 days better Medicare, expanding the Obamacare as it started. So as a student and as a black man, I would like to see that.
Hello, my name is Clara Teku. I am a senior PR major, graphic design minor here at Howard University. And in the first 100 days of Trump's presidency, I would like for him and Congress to address the issues with federal funding towards women's services, because that affects people like myself and other middle class and definitely lower class people.
Hi, my name is Michael Manigault. I'm a junior here at JCSU, Johnson C. Smith. And for the first 100 days, I believe that Trump should improve his immigration policy. I mean, for one, the Muslim ban I don't agree with the Muslim ban, because for one, I have a friend who is Muslim, and plus, not all Muslims are terrorists. And as for the wall policy, I don't think it's going to work either. I mean, I do believe that illegal immigration shouldn't, it's an issue and all, but building a wall isn't going to help.
My name is Mia Ball. I'm a communications major. I'm also a junior here at Bowie State University. And my message is to President Donald Trump. I know a lot of candidates make a lot of promises when running for president, but I would actually like him to lower the rate of unemployment.
Voices from the Road on C-SPAN.
Coming up, UN Ambassador Nikki Haley and House Speaker Paul Ryan address AIPAC, the U.S.-Israel Policy Organization. Speaker Ryan spoke about the importance of the U.S.-Israel relationship.
Okay, go. These days, it's a rare sight to see a Democrat and a Republican standing next to each other, let alone sharing the stage.
But Nita and I are proud to join you and deliver an important message. When it comes to supporting Israel, Democrats and Republicans stand together.
Kay and I have worked for 8 years to strengthen the U.S.-Israel relationship as partners and friends.
We work together most closely as members of the Appropriations Subcommittee on State and Foreign Operations. Nita was chairwoman at the time, and I was ranking member. Our relationship is based on mutual respect. We agree on many issues, like the United States' unequivocal support for Israel. And there's some issues we don't disagree on. But we always listen to each other, and we recognize that in order to get things done, we have to work together.
And we share a common belief that keeping America safe requires a network of strong partnerships around the world. In our committee roles, we help ensure Congress supports our friends and allies through foreign aid.
Foreign assistance plays a crucial role in advancing our national security interests and makes up just a small fraction of the federal government's budget, less than 1%.
And for that minor investment, the United States gets a major payoff: stronger alliances, a safer, more stable world, and a boost to our economy.
Security assistance to Israel is one of the cornerstones of the U.S.-Israel relationship. There's no shortage of dangers facing the Jewish state, whether it's the destabilizing actions of Iran, the Syrian civil war, the spread of ISIS, or the constant threat of violence from terrorist groups like Hamas and Hezbollah.
Our investment helps Israel, our most steadfast partner, gain access to the latest technology and resources to defend itself, no matter the threat. And because Israel buys mostly American technology and supplies with foreign aid, our investment nets us more exports, more growth, and more jobs right here in America.
Most importantly, a modest investment in foreign assistance is the most cost-effective way to prevent threats from arising in the first place. That's why Nita and I are staunch advocates of security assistance to Israel, and why we're grateful to the people in this audience who work tirelessly to engage all of us in Congress on this vital issue, both Republicans and Democrats.
The relationship we've built on the Appropriations Committee has helped us work together on other fronts to advance a strong U.S.-Israel relationship. Last year, Kay and I co-authored a bipartisan letter co-signed by 394 other House members reiterating our support for a two-state solution, supporting direct negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and denouncing one-sided anti-Israel resolutions in the United Nations.
And earlier this month, thanks to bipartisan support, the House approved more than $600 million for Israeli missile defense programs like Iron Dome, and an additional $42 million for U.S.-Israeli anti-tunnel cooperation.
We will continue to work together. The stakes on this issue and the entire foreign aid budget are too high. And we know that when it comes to America's support for Israel, partnership must overcome partisanship. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please welcome co-author of Startup Nation, Dan Senor.
It's no secret that there are few places in the world where Israel is more constantly and unfairly attacked than at the United Nations. The woman we're about to hear from is determined to change that. In January, she gave up her position as governor of South Carolina to represent the United States at the United Nations because she knew she could make a difference. And although she's only been at the UN for 2 months, she's already making her mark, speaking out against attacks on Israel and standing in the proud tradition of past ambassadors like Daniel Patrick Moynihan and Jean Kirkpatrick. Less than 2 weeks ago, Ambassador Haley once again responded to an attack on Israel, demanding that the UN retract a report that viciously and outrageously attacked Israel as an apartheid state. And her action had impact. Soon after, the Secretary General required retraction of the report. Following a recent UN Security Council meeting on the Middle East, Ambassador Haley came out to the press and articulated some plain truths. Here's what she said, quote, "The discussion today on the Middle East was not about Hezbollah's illegal buildup of rockets. It was not about the money and weapons that Iran provides to terrorists. It was not about how we defeat ISIS. It was not about how we hold Bashar Assad accountable." Ambassador Haley said, and I quote, "Instead, the meeting focused on criticizing Israel, the one true democracy in the Middle East." And she closed her statement by saying, quote, "I'm here to say the United States will not turn a blind eye to this anymore." I think you'd all agree that this has been a pretty refreshing change. So please join me in welcoming the agent of that change, the United States Ambassador to the United States, the Honorable Nikki Haley. Ambassador, I think they're a little lukewarm on, I'm just not sure what the reception is going to be like. So let's pick up on where I left off in my introduction, that statement you made following the meeting, the Security Council meeting on the Middle East. Were you surprised what you saw about the attitudes and discussions on the Middle East at the UN, and what could be done to change it?
You know, I was confused. It was totally bizarre because in my first month, talking about the Middle East, there's a lot to talk about. And whether you're talking about Hezbollah or ISIS, all the issues in Syria, which is, a problem, that's what I expected us to talk about. I didn't expect an Israel bashing session. And literally listening to each member say the same thing over and over again, I knew they said it was bad, but until you hear it and you see it, you just can't comprehend how ridiculous it is.
So, a lot of people here are just getting to know you for the first time. The theme of our conference this year is Many Voices, One Mission, celebrating the diversity of the pro-Israel cause. Can you talk a little bit about how you started to learn about Israel, your affinity for Israel?
Well, I am the daughter of Indian parents who reminded my brothers, my sister, and me every day how blessed we were to live in this country. And the truth is, I have seen so many similarities between the Israeli culture and the Indian culture. We're very close-knit. We love our families. We have a strong work ethic. We believe in professionalism and philanthropy and giving back. It's very true. So that's all the good things. We're aggressive, we're stubborn, and we don't back down from a fight. So it's
So I want to talk about some policy